All sports, all plays. All sports, all plays. All sports, all plays. 365, we're making up plays. You talking the game, get you through the days. We're high in the court, the dime in the lane. Variety topics, living the same. All presentation, sports information. Hitting the airways, taking the nation. All sport, all plays. Like working your faces. Grace at the field, so tie the laces. All sports, all plays. All sports, all plays. Network. We on top of our game. All sports, all plays. All sports, all plays.
What's going on, guys? Episode 3 of the Blown Coverage Podcast, part of the All Sports, All Plays Network, powered by Sports and Culture Media. Again, episode 3. We missed last week, so we missed a big jump in the rankings. And guys, brought to you by Chris and Tony. Myself, I'm Porter Hayes, and got a lot to talk about. Got some ground to make up, and not too much shakeup between last week and this week, but there was a big shakeup with Michigan State. So, guys, I'll start with y'all. Thoughts on the new rankings and where you see teams stacked up. Chris, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Tony.
Michigan is still somehow ahead of Michigan State. I don't get it.
And that's a good conversation because I can see it. I know the head-to-head, but you do have to factor in the loss. A blowout loss to Purdue, in my eyes, is when you look at the rankings and how the college football committee goes, it's about body of work. And when you get blown out, if it was a close game, if Purdue would have snuck one out by 7 points, I might have seen why if they would have kept Michigan behind Michigan State. But when you get blowed out, it's kind of hard to justify. Even though they won head-to-head, you still got to look at who beat who in resume. Because that's like, okay, you got Texas A&M at 16. Well, they beat Alabama at number 2. So should they be in the top 10? So, I mean, it all plays in. But, Tony, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. I actually saw something a little earlier that was kind of interesting. So out of at least the top 10 rankings as far as wins go, the only team that's in the top 10 that doesn't actually have a ranked win versus an opponent is Ohio State. And I kind of see where you're saying as far as, Michigan being ranked ahead of Michigan State. I do. But I mean, at the same time, it's one of those. It's kind of the same with if Ohio State is put ahead of Oregon, even though Oregon has the win over them, and if you think about it, Oregon's win would count more over the fact that they beat Ohio State. And I kind of feel the same way with Michigan State. Even though it's one of those, it's hard to make some of those arguments because if you look at Purdue is upset, number 2 Iowa. They upset Michigan State. They had another big upset win against another ranked opponent, if I remember right. Just this season, they've had like 3 top ranked opponents that they not just beaten, they've blown out.
And this is for clarification. When did the Stanford? It was Oregon got beat by Stanford. Did that come after the Ohio State game, or did it come before the Ohio State game?
It came after.
Okay. So, I mean, I can see in the eyes where it would be, it would be the same scenario. So, yeah, I mean, I could see that because both play. And look, and I get into it with people all the time. Ohio, and I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to offend Ohio State fans, but they're some of the most arrogant fans. They think, we need to be, they're looking at Alabama, which I agreed when we first done our first one. I said they should be at 4, but look what happened. Michigan State got blown out, so they slid in that spot. I mean, it all plays out. And Ohio State fans have no reason to complain because you look at Michigan, they're not the 6th best team in the nation.
No.
They're catering to Ohio State just like they're catering to Alabama and Georgia when it comes to the rankings in the SEC. Now, Georgia by far is above and beyond. They don't need help. I mean, it's Georgia and everybody else still.
Yep.
Alabama, they're still suspect to me, and they're going to get a good test. I'm not saying that Arkansas can win the game, but Arkansas has a chance to go in there and really hang with them and make it another struggle win. Alabama, every time they've played a tough opponent, they've struggled. So, and of course, the big elephant room. We got Cincinnati right there knocking at the door at 5, waiting on Oregon and Ohio State. So I guess I want to start it off with a question is, what would happen, this is hypothetically, what would it say and we'll start with Tony on this one. If somehow Ohio State gets beat by Michigan State or Oregon gets beat by Utah, what happens if one of those teams lose and then a team like Michigan hops over Cincinnati?
Well, I'll be honest with you. If say hypothetically that does happen, if Ohio State loses to Michigan State, I would immediately say that moves Michigan State to at least the 4 spot. And if Oregon falls to Utah, I would say that moves Cincinnati up to the 3, because at that point, then you are like really reaching to have a 2-loss team in the playoffs. That would be the same like if Arkansas for whatever reason beats Bama, then and they're like, oh well, Bama's still in the top 10. No, you're doing that purely for a financial gain, because you want, like kind of like we talked about last episode, you want the SEC championship to basically be almost repeated again in the college football playoffs. And at that point, to me, it just kind of defeats the purpose of even having it. As far as Michigan goes, because that's the other thing we have to take into consideration. Ohio State still has to play Michigan State and Michigan both, which as of right now are both top 10 ranked teams. So, I mean, if Ohio State's able to come away with it, I can very easily see making an argument that Ohio State has solidified themselves being in the playoffs, especially now that Oklahoma took a loss last week against Baylor. I still would make the argument that Cincinnati still needs to be in there. But again, that's also kind of dependent on what Oregon does. I don't really know Oregon's next 2 games off the top of my head.
But they got Utah and Oregon State. They got their big rivalry game at the end of the season.
Right. But I could also make the argument too, neither one of those teams are ranked. Now it is in the Pac-12, so obviously we got to take account that those aren't going to be easy walk-off games for them by no stretch. But yeah, I think honestly the biggest thing for this weekend is Ohio State going to solidify that A, they're going to be basically the Big Ten champions, and B, do they actually deserve to be in the top 4 of the playoffs as of right now?
And before we move on to Chris, guys, if you're listening, leave us some comments. We'll read them during the show and really get your comments and your thoughts of what you think. How everything's going to play out, and what's your thoughts on how they got the ranking so far. So, Chris, what's your thoughts?
If Michigan State beats Ohio State, I have them at 3. Regardless,
I agree.
I would have them at 3. And Cincinnati, they still are in you have to prove it mode. If everybody wins that's supposed to win, first off, I do think I'm actually thinking Arkansas beats Bama. Their defense is very suspect. I know their rankings efficiency are kind of high. I'm not buying it. I've seen the common opponents, and I think Arkansas can hang. If KJ Jefferson shows up like he's done quite a bit this year and balls out, I think he can take advantage of this weak front 7 of Bama, who has been very inconsistent. I mean, A&M did the same thing. They exposed a lot of holes in this defense, and Arkansas has a much better defense than they're given credit for. So I actually have them upsetting Bama prediction-wise.
Right, that's bold. That's bold.
Yeah.
And as somebody who covers Arkansas sports, I mean, we'll take all that we can get. It's just Arkansas fan base in a nutshell is, it's like Charlie Brown in the football. You get hyped up. You get to the point to where, all right, we're going to win this big game. Georgia, we'll put that perfect example. They go into the game, and the fan base is like, all right, we can hang with them. Whoops, there's the football, and they just – I mean, the game was over before it really started. So I think that's a big hesitancy. And plus, Arkansas hasn't beaten Alabama in forever. 15 years, I believe. So the thing that gets me is it's at Alabama. I think if this game was in Arkansas, where you get the fans, 2:30 game, you get the hype, just like the Texas game, they can hang with them in Bryant-Denny. But I just think in the long run, it's the depth of Arkansas is going to get them, because you look at the last 2 games. Yeah, they've beat Mississippi State and they've beaten LSU, but they've really had to rely on a field goal to kind of squeak these out. So that's where it kind of, a team like Alabama, you're not going to be able to squeak anything out. You're just going to have to go in there and get some more turnovers and hopefully, keep the momentum on Arkansas' side. But I do get your point that they can hang with them, and there's a possibility they can go in and win. But
I think so.
Oklahoma. I mean, man, everybody just thought with this new quarterback, they were just going to be the truth, and they were a lock for the, and everybody. It's not to me, a dumb statement, because they were really looking like a totally different team with Caleb Williams. So
Yep.
Baylor just took it to them.
Yeah, I'd agree. Because if you look at it, Oklahoma is typically so offensive driven, and you could really say that for a majority of the Big 12. Like there's really no Big 12 team to me that is just defensively known. Like if you ever want a defensively good team, you look mainly towards the SEC, maybe a couple Big 10 teams here and there. But for the most part, if you want defense, you look there. For Oklahoma, the fact that Baylor – and we've even seen this the last few times Baylor has played Oklahoma. They have held Oklahoma to some of the fewest point totals that they have scored all season long. And to me, I think that just kind of exposed Oklahoma. If you look kind of early on in the season, Oklahoma was, they were winning, but they were winning by like just barely margin to teams that, nobody expected to be good at all. And
it's funny you say that. You're looking at like what Chris said about Arkansas, and they're due for a win against Alabama. It's like you look at these teams, and it's like they were due for a loss. Oklahoma was down big to Texas. They struggled to Kansas, and then what about that was crazy. The win at Texas. I mean, you're talking about a dumpster fire in the Big 12. I mean, Texas has just fallen off the wagon. But Oklahoma State, their defense, I mean, when we talk about, the Big 12 not really known, they're actually a legitimate defense. So, Chris, what's your thoughts? I mean, Oklahoma State's sitting there at 10. They run the table. They got Texas Tech and Oklahoma. I mean, what's the chances they can make a big jump and make the college football playoff?
Well, here's their chance. The ACC does not have someone representing. They're out. So that's a hole. You talk about Power 5 fitting 4 in. Okay, ACC's out. You got Cincinnati and Notre Dame lingering, and there's a possibility Notre Dame squeaks in somehow. That means everybody else is going to lose. But for Oklahoma State, which I do have them beating Oklahoma, I do. I have them taking it to them. Efficiency-wise, Oklahoma State's defense is miles above where Baylor's been all year.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think they get that win, and that sets up the dominoes, because whether it's Ohio State, Michigan, that's going to take care of itself between who faces who and the Big Ten title.
Yeah.
Then you look at one there, doesn't matter. They're interchangeable to me. I don't think they're that different. So you've got SEC champion, Big Ten champ. Who's 3? Who's 4? I don't think that Cincinnati goes undefeated. I think Houston has a really good chance of beating them in the AAC title. That's a really good Houston team. We'll see what happens there. Oregon is not that good. And I hate to put them on blast. They're not that good. They got very lucky and caught Ohio State at a time when C.J. Stroud didn't know the offense. And I don't think they could beat Ohio State today by any means.
Yeah,
so,
and I agree with that.
There's a chance they may lose again. So, man,
they got Utah coming up. So, I mean, that's going to be a big game.
And I'm going to say something probably a little out there. It's probably going to be a bit of a reach, but living here in Ohio currently and watching a lot of the Ohio State games, even though statistically Ohio State is ranked up there as far as they're number 1 in yardage, they're number 1 in scoring, they have a very potent offense. I don't know if y'all have seen it, but to me, this is not a typical Ohio State team that I'm used to seeing. Like, I look at the last year's team with Justin Fields, you had Chris Olave, you had all these, key pieces. And even then, it seemed like Ohio State has kind of taken a step back. Like, if you look at the year, they still had, Terry McLaurin, you had Chase Young, you had those guys. That was an Ohio State team that I could legitimately see them going into a Bama, going to a Georgia, and being competitive. Now, other than Chris Olave and a little bit of C.J. Stroud, I don't see really anybody on this Ohio State offense that kind of, puts that fear into me. And really the same on their defense. If you look at Ohio State, what are they almost always known for? They had at least one edge rusher, and they had a cornerback at least that would be a ball hawk. And I haven't seen that from either side of the ball. So even to me, I think is even as much as I want Michigan State to win, Michigan State's defense is a gaping, just massive hemorrhage of a part of the team. I think Ohio State wins the Big Ten, but I would not trust Ohio State any farther in the playoffs, just the same as I don't really trust Oregon, because to me, Oregon, like Chris said, I think they got lucky with Ohio State. And other than that, Oregon really hasn't done anything else to me to show that, yeah, they're a team to worry about if they get into the playoffs.
Yeah, and man, it would be hard, even if they did. Just you're looking at the rankings. If Ohio State runs the table, you have to put them in, because I mean it doesn't matter what we think of Michigan; they're still ranked. Michigan State's ranked 7th, Michigan's ranked 6th. If you run the table and win, you got to win the conference. But you look at college football as a whole. You look at the SEC East. And I said this on Twitter. Outside of Georgia, they're the ACC. I mean, it's just everybody's just struggling to beat each other.
Mm-hmm.
Look, the ACC is just nowhere to be found. I mean, even if Wake runs the table, they're not going to go. So it's like the ACC is now what the Pac-12 used to be. You know, you're not going to get. You're not going to get anybody in.
Well, and
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
and you know, Wake Forest is going to have a dog of a fight, even if they run the table, because of that loss against North Carolina. Like, you let North Carolina put up I think it was over almost 60 points up against them. So I mean that, you know, you can make an argument for some of the others. Like if you lose it by a touchdown, if you keep it in the 30s, you know, hey, it is a good game. But you know, basically, if you're going almost 60 points for 60 points. You had absolutely no defense, and it just came down to who had the ball last. And for Wake Forest, no, I don't think they could even if they ran the table, I don't think they could even come close to sniffing the playoffs.
Did you know that Wake Forest game didn't count as an ACC game?
It did not. It did not.
They had
something beforehand. They had played them before, and it was scheduled that way. So yes, that the first time did not count, and that went back to last year. I believe they had to play so many games, and I think one of them they played, and it didn't count as a conference game. So, yeah.
Something about, you know, keeping the rivalry going without, you know, going over the amount of allowed ACC games or something. But I just want to throw a wrinkle into the system, because this is not going to happen, but how cool would it be? Ohio State beats Michigan and Michigan State, but loses to Wisconsin. Wisconsin actually has –
they're number 1 in the West.
Third best defense statistically in college football. That would actually be a good matchup.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I will say, having been married to a Badgers fan, I secretly just don't want the Badgers to do that. But yeah.
Chris, I got a question about Georgia. All right, because we know I mean, unless Alabama falls to Arkansas or Auburn, which with Bo Nix, that's just not going to happen. Auburn's not going to beat Alabama without Bo Nix.
Nope.
So how hard, you know, because Georgia's got Charleston Southern and Georgia Tech, both unranked teams. And they really, I mean, they gave up a little bit of points to Tennessee. You know, they started off strong. How hard is it for them to be able to, because one, if you're any team, the most team that's got the pressure, it's Georgia. Just because of that, you know, Alabama, we need to beat them. Kirby Smart finally getting that win against Alabama. How hard is that going to be for them to get a couple of weeks off and then have to go play Alabama after having a lackluster conference slate?
It's funny you ask that. I was on the conference call today, and I was going to ask Kirby, you know, what kind of pressure are you guys feeling for this Bama game? Didn't get to ask. They ran out of time. But I would say pressure-wise, the difference this year than I think the last few years, Bama has had that it factor, the scare factor, where you go into a Bama game, you're expecting to get physically beaten up, ran over. They don't have that this year. Their defense doesn't have that. Their offensive line has Evan Neal, and name the second guy you'd put as an All-American. So this is a different team. And if I'm Georgia preparing for this game, the best thing to do is don't prepare until after Georgia Tech. So, you know,
and it's funny what you could say about Alabama. He just said the same thing about Ohio State, as in what our perception has been of the team and what they are. Mm-hmm. It's crazy to see. You know, you're looking at 3 teams. I mean, Clemson's just way out of it, but those 3 teams that we thought were just these dominant, you can count on them being just at the top every year, and just seeing them kind of fall. And I think the transfer portal has a lot to do with it. I mean, these other teams are just getting these one or two guys who can come in and make big plays, and it's starting to even itself out. And also, man, you got this NIL stuff, and I think, some of them kids, they're getting it, and they're not – the focus is not on 100% college football now. You're getting these sponsors and these deals, and I think it's kind of, in this first year, that land rush, everybody's trying to go grab whatever they can, and it's kind of took some of the luster away from the team. And I've seen a lot of teams that with these kids, you got the kid not even playing at Ohio State this year that making $1 million. So, I mean, that affects the rest of the locker room.
Well, that, and I mean, like you said with the transfer portal, I mean, if you can take Alabama, for example, Alabama has, a stranglehold as far as, majority of the southern states go. And, even if you're not from a southern state, if you're really good at football, where do you want to go as far as competing for a national championship and be at a professional level? You want to go to Bama. And I think with the transfer portal, it's good because it gives some of these schools, if a kid transfers to somewhere like Oregon, hey, I can go to the SEC, but I'm going to get beat up, and we're not really going to be able to compete because we're going to have to be competing with the Georgias, with the Bamas, occasionally with the Floridas whenever Florida rebounds, because Florida seems to always give the SEC a run for its money. I don't know why. They always do. It gives these kids a chance to be able to go somewhere and compete for something, and I think that's what I like about college football now with the transfer portal is it's almost seemed to make the playing field a lot more even, and that's why we're seeing all of these teams, with one losses, whereas, like y'all said, 2-3 years ago, at least the top 10 was probably going to be undefeated until the last 2 games of the season, and then, that's pretty much when your wins count.
I will say the transfer portal definitely plays a role. Another thing that not too many talk about is the extra year of eligibility. You got the super senior team in Illinois. There's a lot of teams that have, look at Pitt. I think they said they have 6 guys that are super seniors that are starters. If that hadn't been a COVID year, where would Pitt be without those guys? And there's a lot of teams like that. So you take the top tier talent and you give them, 4 years to build a program, get these guys through. Now some of these guys have 5 or 6 years with a red shirt, and they're taking advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And as far as transfers, Jameson Williams is a great example of going from rich to richer just to get richer, and it working out for him.
I mean, you could even go to I'm not a big fan of his, and that's part of why he got benched, I think, is Jack Cohn from Wisconsin. He didn't, he was a starter for Wisconsin, didn't really do anything spectacular for them, and then goes to Notre Dame. And, was a part of a ranked competition. Now he got benched, but, hey, still shows you go from one, pretty good program as far as the Big Ten goes. But again, you got to face Ohio State. You got to face the Michigans. You got to face the Michigan States, and last year, even Indiana was up there as far as being one of the top ranked teams. And, okay, well, now I don't have to do that. Now I'm going to go be part of the independent / the ACC. And, the competition isn't going to have to be as hard because Clemson isn't going to do anything. North Carolina is not known for being a big college football school. So,
right.
Yeah, and Dabo's really made it a thing, and he's kind of had to backtrack on it, but he's not a big fan of the transfer portal. I mean, they've got so many kids leaving for the transfer portal, and I think that's where his egos come kind of haunting. And now you're going to be looking at Virginia Tech that has a coaching open vacancy. Yeah. Is Elliott going to jump? Because, I mean, you see a fan base turn on a team. Look what happens when Clemson goes from what they're used to being. Now they're praising because the team scored over 20 points. It's ridiculous. And as a Clemson fan, I was just looking at the Florida State game like, come on, which team wants to win? And they got Wake Forest, so they can throw a real monkey wrench in that whole thing with the ACC. But I guess what we'll do is we'll end it on this, and I'm going to pick out 3 games other than the Michigan State, Ohio State, because that's going to be the most that could go either way. You got Oklahoma State, Texas Tech. You have Oregon and Utah, and then you've got Oklahoma and Iowa State. Of those 3 games, which team would you put on upset alert? Chris, I'll start with you.
I'm choosing option Arkansas because I think I think Bama's got it coming. I said it, and I'll keep saying it. This is not Bama from every year. This is a different Bama team, and A&M found a way to expose them. Arkansas, 31-28, getting the W.
All right, Tony.
Okay. Honestly, looking at it, with the exception of the Michigan State versus Ohio State, which, like I said, I think Ohio State will win, but I could very easily, Michigan State managed to pull it out against Michigan. Michigan kind of, just shot themselves in the foot. I could see Ohio State doing the same. As far as another upset, I think I could see Iowa State beating Oklahoma. And I say that because Iowa State has always been, I feel like both the Iowa teams for the last few years, they've never been good enough to be like in the Big Ten championship, but they're like this close. They're always just right on the edge, and they always give those bigger teams a run for their money, even though they usually end up losing. Could very easily see them end up doing it to Oklahoma as well, and I think that would kind of be the beginning of the kind of sputter down for Oklahoma this year as they go into the offseason with who do they want at quarterback? Do they want Spencer Rattler or do they want the rookie Williams?
I'm going to go with the Oregon-Utah game just to throw a different option out there. And it's one of them deals that, Oregon, you got Oregon State, after that, are they looking ahead? Utah is always one of them sneaky teams where they can come up and bite somebody. So if I was to have to pick one, Oregon, I would have to go with Utah over Oregon, but because I really wanted to pick the Iowa State, but I didn't want to, piggyback off what you said. But there's another thing you got to think about is you switch your quarterbacks. They look like they're doing so good, and then you get thumped by Baylor. What does that do to the team, their psyche? Do they come back and just blow it out, or do they get humbled? And you look at Arkansas's loss against Georgia, how long that set. They went on a 3-game losing streak after that. That really humbled the team and set them back a lot. And now, Arkansas has made it way back in the top 25. Another point you were talking about the last segment was the transfer portal and the super seniors. If there's any team that has really benefited from super seniors and the transfer portal, Arkansas has to be one of the top 10 teams that has benefited, Grant Morgan, all these guys, Ridgeway coming in, all these players that have came back and really helped set that foundation for the Arkansas defense. But other than that, guys, I mean, it's go time. I think we're at the last 2 weeks. We got conference championships coming up. We're really going to see. We've got a lot of games coming up. Alabama's got Arkansas, Auburn, Ohio State. We mentioned got Michigan State, Michigan. You look at Oklahoma, they got Iowa State and then Oklahoma State. So I'm telling you, this first four is far from getting settled. And this is going to be one of them years that I think going into the last weekend, we're not just going to be wondering who's number 4. I think we have a serious chance of wondering who's 3 and 4. I really do think that's going to come out. As much as I hate it, I think it's going to be Georgia and Ohio State is going to be one of them deals that we know they're going to be the 2 best teams because I think they're going to beat Michigan State and Michigan and then handle Wisconsin. So I think we're going to see a big spinoff on who's going to be the final 2 spots. And I think as a college football fan, we need that because we've always locked 3 teams in and we're just, okay, guesswork at who's 4. Now I think the committee is really going to have to work and really see who's deserving. And if you wanted expansion, I think this is going to be the year where they're going to really be saying we need an expansion because you're going to have 2 or 3 teams with 1 loss. And if a two-loss team gets in, you're going to be opening Pandora's box for expansion and moving on forward.
Oh yeah, for sure. And people are going to be outraged because like you said, if you have your 3 and 4 locked and you have all these 1-loss teams, and then you open it up for maybe a 2-loss, that kind of undermines everything that Cincinnati has done. Now I think with teams like Cincinnati and some of these more independent and smaller schools, the fact that they're joining these Power 5 conferences, I think the fact that Cincinnati joined the Big 12, I think is going to make a world of difference for them because you think about it in the Big 12, you're going to have at least 2, maybe 3 of those teams are going to be ranked at least. May not be, top 10, but they're going to at least be in the top 25. And I think that will help Cincinnati as far as their quality of opponents. Probably won't do much for them this year, but the future of Cincinnati, which, as if you guys have paid attention the last few years, Cincinnati's almost always been up there in the top 25. Again, not top 10, but they've almost always been up there. They have a consistent program out in Cincy. So, I mean, it's very possible.
This is the last year of it too, because I think Luke Fickle's gone after this year.
Yeah. Cincinnati's become the new Boise State. So
Yeah.
let's see if they finally let them in. But guys, another great episode 3 of the Blown Coverage podcast. We'll be back next week at this time, 6 o'clock. Be sure if you got any comments, any questions throughout the week, save them for us and get ready for the shakeup because it's coming.
Gobble, gobble.
Yes, everybody have a good thing.
All sports, all plays. Yeah. All sports, all plays. All sports, all plays. 365, we're making a plays. You talking the game, get you through the days. We're high in the court, the dime in the lane. Variety topics, living the same. All presentation, sports information. Hitting the airways, taking the nation. All sport, all plays, like working your faces. Grace